Hello and welcome to part 2 of this course, which is I'm calling Learn After Effects in Seconds. Might be a few more seconds than you first thought, but it's still seconds. I mean, everything is seconds and then minutes and hours and days, but still seconds. Anyway, this is part 2, and I think what we're going to do here is we'll concentrate on this area here, which is the timeline. So I'll just select that. There we are, the timeline is selected. So what I'm going to hopefully do is go through pretty much most of the features that the timeline has to offer within After Effects, and a basic run through of each feature if possible that's on a basic level. There will be some advanced stuff that I won't run through straight away. I'll do that a little bit later on the sort of intermediate or the advanced stuff. So anyway, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new composition using another way which I probably didn't show you in the previous video, and that is to select one of your pieces of footage. In this case I'm going to select Thai, and I'm going to drag that down into this little box here, and what that's going to do, that's going to create a composition based on exactly the parameters of that video here. So this composition is going to be, if I go to composition settings, that's going to be called Thai. So Thai, and it's 1920 by 1080, which is full HD, which is what the original setting was, and 59.94 frames a second, and 7 seconds and 43. So that's great, and that's a really nice way of taking your footage straight into a new composition without having to go through and set up your composition to match it up. But that's just if you're doing a quick edit or something quick like that. So as you can see, that's put that down on our timeline, which is perfect, exactly what we want. And we can scrub through our footage right through to the end. It's a bit jerky. The reason for that is, if you can just see here, there's a little sort of blue and green dashed kind of pattern going on here. That's your cache. So if I was to press spacebar, oops, I've got some sound, I'll just turn that off again. And you'll see this green area here move across, filling in the blanks, and that's caching in each frame into your hard drive. So if I was to go back and scrub, that would be much smoother here than here, and that's all that's doing there. So that's something that you'll soon become accustomed to and annoyed with as well. Alright, so first thing we see on the far left here is actually let's go through this little area here. This is like a sort of menu of what you could have in your layers here. So for example, this one here has no box associated with it, and neither does this one, the FX. There's nothing there, and I'll tell you why as soon as we get to that. These ones all have a little box, and it's basically associated with the same thing. So if I was to turn that on or that on, you'd see it represents this little icon here. So anyway, this one here is the little eye, and that just turns the visibility off and on. Simple enough. And this one here is audio. This bit of footage has audio attached to it, so if I turn that on, it means I get audio. It's not very nice audio. So what I'll do is I'll show you another method of importing some footage, except this time it's going to be audio. And that is just to go into your file explorer or your finder, find some audio. I'm going to grab this thing here called elephants.mp3 and drag that straight in. And that should, there we are, pop into this area here. So I'm going to create a new folder and call it audio. And I'll drag that into there. Incidentally, this Thai composition that it created when I dragged in defaults into the same folder that you have your original footage in. So I'm just going to drag that into compositions, so it just keeps it nice and tidy. Whatever you move here has no implications on anything else down here or up here. It's just for your own reference, just a library, imagine it like that. Okay, so now in audio I have elephants.mp3. I'm going to turn this audio on this layer off, and I'm going to drag that down underneath or on top, it doesn't matter, because there's no visibility associated with this because it's an audio file. So it knows that, and it won't give you the option to turn the visibility on and off because that would be just weird. Okay, so we have this, and if I was to press spacebar, you see I have some audio attached to it now. So if I turn that off, obviously the audio is not there. Simple as that. That's all that is. So next thing is this little button here. This is your solo. So what it's going to do is it's solo a layer. So if I take the images, Star Wars logo from the images and drop that straight on top, and just leave it as it is, that's fine. And solo it, it means that's the only thing I'll see. Everything else is hidden, not deleted, just hidden. And same goes if I go to the tie layer and just solo it, everything else is hidden. And you can do as many layers as you want on this. So if I press Control D with the Star Wars logo, that will duplicate it. And I can move that around and duplicate it and move it around. That's created a whole load of layers here. So I can then solo this layer or both. So I can have 2 layers selected and soloed just because I just want to see those ones. So that's a pretty useful tool for keeping things nice and simple when you're animating. Okay, let's just put that back there because that looks nice. So now we have an image, our movie, and an audio file in our timeline. So the next thing along is a padlock. And simple enough, you might have guessed it, that locks the layer. So we select our layer, we don't even have to do that, but we padlock it, and then I try and move, it will just pick the layer up underneath. So if I try and select it, it just flashes at me. It's kind of like, get off, get lost, screw it. I cannot move that layer, it will only move the layer underneath. If I lock both, that's it, I can't move a thing. Okay, they are locked. With the elephants.mp3, that lock will just stop me from going into anything else inside, which I'm just about to show you in a second. So that's the lock layer. Also, yeah, I'll come back to this in a second. You see, I'll offset these and I'll show you how to reset them back to where you had them. The next thing is this. This is a shy layer. It's not used a lot. I have used it a few times with some really heavy animations that I've had to do, where I've had 70 to 80 or 90 or 100 layers, and it became awful to look at. So using a shy layers is a good way of managing and organizing your layers, so you can see what you're doing much easier. So I'll just show you quickly how they work. So these are set to off, which means they're not shy, because you can, if you look carefully, you can just see a little head with 2 eyes and a nose poking over a wall. At least I think that's what it is anyway. So if I was to select that, this little head drops down and you can just see top of his head, and that is now a shy layer. Nothing has happened up here. When you click it, nothing happens until you turn that on. And this is the layer, the button on the actual timeline that you turn all the shy layers on. So if I turn that on, okay, you notice the layer that was shy has vanished. It hasn't been deleted, it is still there, but it's hidden because it's shy, and I turned it on as a shy layer. So if I turn that back off, it will reveal my shy layer again. So if I did that, click that on and turned it on again, it's going to make everything disappear. Even though I can still see it in my composition, it's hidden them from the actual timeline because they're shy. So you might think, well, why on earth would I want to do that? But if you do have 100 layers, you are going to want to start to hide stuff in here, but not in here. It just keeps things a little easier to work with. Okay, this thing here is something called collapse transformations, which is what we will get to a little bit later on. It involves having a composition inside here and its function of the footage you have inside this composition. So we'll get to that later. This thing here, sorry, we're here now. Quality and sampling, again, you won't use it too much. It will just affect very small things, usually with vector layers. And again, I'll come to it in a slightly later course, slightly later video. But if I select here and I change this, I don't know if you can see anything change, but it's just changing the way the alias is working. But we'll come to that a little bit later on. So I'll put that back to the default, just mouse wheel out so we can see what we're doing. Okay, the next thing along here is the effects. This is something you will see a lot. So again, there is no actual tick box associated with any of these under the effects. That's because we have no effects associated with these layers. So what I'll do is I'll show you some effects. So if we select our PNG, we don't actually have to select it. And in our effects and presets tab, we can just have a look for, I've got bright already selected, so I'll just use brightness and contrast, and I'll take that effect and drag it onto that layer. I can either drag it into here, onto the actual footage itself, or the name of the footage, or straight onto the actual footage in the composition itself. I'll just drop it there. Nothing has happened, but what has happened nothing's happened over here, but what has happened over in the project window is we've just acquired an effects controlled tab inside the project window. I'll just move this over. Okay, and that is associated with our Star Wars logo. So if I was to select Thai, you won't see it. Elephants MP3, you won't see it. If I select Star Wars logo, it will show you brightness and contrast, and this has now appeared. So you can turn off whatever I do here, off and on. So if I up the brightness of our logo and up the contrast or lower the contrast, you can see that's had an effect on it. And if I click this, it will reset it back to its original default state. Although this setting is still here and still there if you need it, it's just turning it off and on for you. And the reason that's there is more than likely to do with rendering. So you can set your effects up exactly how you want them and then just switch them off here so you can scrub through your timeline a little bit quicker because it's not having to think about what it's doing with those. So that's the effects on, off, on, off. Just a quick thing here, if I remember, in the effects controls, once you've got an effect up here, if you need to see this all the time but still work with other layers, you can click this little viewer locker here and that will keep this visible. So if I select Thai and elephants, it's still there. I can still play with it. Even though I've got this layer selected, I can still play with this. So that's just good to know. Actually, I only found that out recently, so there we are. Okay, where are we now? So this one here is the frame blending. I will come to that at another tutorial. That's a lot to do with it's changing the speed of your footage. If you have, for example, a 1 second clip and you need to make it 2 seconds, then you're going to have to extend that footage. The problem with that is you don't have the frames to extend it with. So this little option here will interpolate those frames for you with a few other settings involved as well, and do its best depending on the quality of the footage you have to make it feel right. But usually it doesn't work. But we'll try and come across that one a bit later on here. This is your motion blur. Very useful for motion blur. So just as a quick example, I shall select our PNG and I'm going to animate this right from here. So if I press P, in fact I'm not going to press P, I'm going to twirl down this area here, and you can see what that's doing is it's showing me all the parameters and attributes associated with this layer. So I have an effects parameter, which is this here, which is, you can have as many as you want. So if I put another one in there, for example, I'll just put Bloom Brights, drag that straight into there, that is still within our effects parameter here. So I can delete these if I want to, doesn't make any difference, and that has now disappeared from our actual pull down menu in our attributes. So we're left with transform. And transform is basically what it says. It transforms your footage or image into something else, or to a position, or however you want to deal with it. And that usually includes anchor point, which is basically the center point. Position, you can see just down here in this area, when I move this, these figures change. Scale, again, if I scale this up and down, you'll see that change. Rotation, now I can rotate using the drag. Same with any of these, you can move these things just by dragging. Pretty useful. Depending if you can't be bothered going up here or whatever, you can just start dragging around in this area here. Or opacity, and that basically reduces the opacity down and increases the transparency so you can't see it, and it will reveal some footage behind it. So this little button here will reset that exactly as it was when I dragged it straight in. And the same goes for the Thai layer. So if I go to reset, that will put it straight back in the middle where it was. This also has an audio attribute because it has audio associated with it. So I'll just close that back up. And what I was going to do was show you the motion blur. So if I move this, in fact I'll do it this way, position X and Y. So if I drag X across here to the left, and then just tidy it up here, and then I keyframe that, click this little stopwatch, press that, and it will turn blue, and add a keyframe right there in your timeline, right where this slider bar is. And that's telling After Effects, at this point in time, this bit of footage needs to be at these exact coordinates. And then if I move forward, not very far, say there, and then change my X right over to the other side. Again, that's saying at this point in time, move it over this place, and it would interpolate that between. So I'm just going to turn off this layer so you can't see it, and watch that go across. Now that looks great, except there's no motion blur. So to make the motion blur appear, which is a nice sort of realistic effect that you get with a lot of standard cameras, if someone runs across the camera, it will be blurry unless it's a super high frame rate on the camera. So we'll turn that on, and there we are, and then nothing will still happen. That's because you need the master motion blur for all the layers switched on. Once that's on, you can see that has now put some motion blur on that bit of footage. So no motion blur, motion blur. Same goes if I turn it off here. No motion blur, motion blur. There we are. So that's a pretty neat effect. So let's play that. Yeah. If I was to close up, let's just zoom out a little bit. If I was to close up this gap and make the whole thing a little quicker, the motion blur will increase to represent the speed that's going. So look at that now. So that's pretty clever. All right, that's the motion blur. On a basic level, there are a few other things that we can change within there, but I will come to that a little bit later on in the course. So I can now go back to here, or anywhere you like, delete these layers. So lasso select and press backspace or delete, and then reset, and that will set it back exactly to where I have it. So everything is as it was. And I can turn that off or leave it on, it makes no difference because there's no animation going on anyway. The next thing is this, and this is basically the adjustment layer. And what an adjustment layer is a layer that has effects applied to it, and everything underneath it will be affected by that effect. And you can actually go to layer, new, layer, new, adjustment layer, and that will create an adjustment layer in your timeline. Although it's visible here, it's invisible on here because this is selected, and that's telling After Effects this is an adjustment layer. Do not show it, but show its effects only onto the layers underneath. So if I was to turn that off, you'd probably turn white, and that's because it's making that adjustment layer visible. So turn that back on, and again, let's also turn my tie layer on, so everything is there, and I select my adjustment layer and drag brightness onto it, and then play with the brightness. It will affect the whole timeline, all of the footage in my timeline. Okay, if I was to move that adjustment layer below the PNG, that then lost its effect on that PNG. So whatever is below the adjustment layer will be affected, and that's what that is. And you can set this on any layer. It just happens to be on an adjustment layer itself, and that's something that they've built quite nicely into After Effects, and you use that quite a lot if you need to change the color or do some grading on the entire footage, including all its effects and logos. Use an adjustment layer, and that'll keep you sweet. Okay, so let's get rid of the adjustment layer just for now, and this layer, this particular bit here, is a little 3D box, and that gives you the opportunity to make your layers 3D. So at the moment they just go up and down, left and right, and sort of on a flat space, but selecting this will turn that into a 3D layer. So if we turn that layer on, you'll notice now I have an up arrow Y and a red right arrow, which is X, and there's also, you can't really see it, but that is an arrow in Z pointing straight at us. So again, I can move this arrows around or move it around, but it's actually in 3D space. And a good way to demonstrate this is to create a camera. We can create a camera in a couple of ways. We can right click on our timeline and say new camera, or we can go layer, new camera, select that, and your camera settings window will pop up. No, don't worry about this at the moment. I'm just going to select OK and leave it as default settings, and that's created a camera. And you can see in your timeline there you have a camera. It's not visible in the composition. You need to just imagine we are looking straight through it because it's saying active camera here. And this is something I will go through with you when we get to the actual composition settings. And slowly I'll fill you in with all these little things anyway. None of them are massively super important to learning everything about After Effects, and when I come to it I will get to them. So now we have a camera, we can show you how 3D this layer actually is. So there's a tool up here, this one here, called Unified Camera. Click that and that gives you a method of panning around. So what that's doing is it's not moving that footage, it's moving the camera. It just shows you that layer is actually 3D, which is pretty nice and really useful for After Effects. And you'll start to use this more and more, and it's really, I mean, I can't stress enough how much I've used this to create all sorts of things. You know, just as an example, I'll reset that back to its spot. Oh, it is already reset. I need to reset the camera. I do apologise. I did say this isn't moving, the camera is. Reset the camera. There we are. So I'm going to take the position, the Z position of this Star Wars logo. If you notice, we now have 3 of these, the X, the Y, and this is the Z. So if I was to drag that, you see it seems to get bigger and smaller. Actually, it's getting further away and closer, further away and closer, further close, further close. So I'll move that slightly closer. Let's say -100. And I'll leave the actual tie, which is now need a 3D layer as well, where it is. Now if I pan around, you'll see that that appears to be sitting just on top, which is a really sweet look. So that's the 3D layer. Beautiful. Okay, if you right click on here, that will, on your mouse button, apologies, that will switch to zoom in, zoom out. And if you middle mouse, click and drag, that pans your footage. So you've got left mouse click to roll around, middle mouse to pan, and right mouse to zoom. Okay, it's pretty useful to know. Cool. Alright, that's the 3D layers. I'll just close this up. And what's next? This little twirly thing. Okay, what it says there is exactly what it is. This little area here is for parenting. So, for example, if I was to parent the logo to the movie like this, I can drag this little thing, creates a little thing which if you let go goes boink, boink. If you're bored you can just play with that for a while. Thrank. Anyway, if you drag that onto this layer, that means that this tie is the parent of this. So if you look here, it says parent. So this has a parent of tie. So if I was to select tie and just go back to my move tool and move it, the logo comes with it. Okay, if I was to move the logo, that's fine. It's independent. But the tie actual movie has that logo as a child and it will take it with it. You come with me, Sam. So that's the parenting, and you can also select in the pull down menu what you want to parent. So instead of pick whipping, that's what it's called, or it's the technical term, into tie like that, you can just pull down this and select tie instead. It does the same thing. Most people will pick whip because it's just more satisfying, really. And that's this area here. That's pretty much the gist of the bits and bobs in here. I'll just quickly run through what I missed on here. I pretty much went through that, I think, yeah, all the little transforms and things like that. Let's move on a little bit to the actual footage within our timeline. So this is cool, we're all set up, we're ready to go with our animation. But this is a bit long. Yeah, this is a bit long. I only want to do 1 second. I only want this bit here. How do we go about setting it just to do that? Well, you need to grab this thing here. You can either go to composition and then composition settings, and then change your amount here and fiddle around with it, but that will take a while and that's not very fun. So best way to do it is to put your wherever it is you want to end it, let's say there, and this little thing here is basically your how can I describe this, your composition preview stroke render area. Yeah, that'll do. Oh, probably says work area. There we are. So let's say this is the spot on area right here, right on 1 second. Press N and that will seal that up right into there. So conversely, if you want the beginning to be here right on 30, you press B, or you can drag it, but it's easier just to press B because you know you're in the right spot. And that is exactly what you want. So let's say I want this to be my composition. I will right click in here and trim comp to work area. Then the whole thing is now stretched out to that tiny little area of half a second or so, whatever it was. Yeah, it's about half a second, something like that. Don't judge me. Anyway, so what else can we do in here? Well, these bits of footage can be moved around. So if I was to say move that over here, it won't appear until we get there, which is useful. We can also turn it off. Okay, so if we select this layer and we press Alt, how can I describe what this is? It's the right square bracket key. So Alt, right square bracket, that will seal that off there. So we only get it flashing on and off there. Yeah, and another thing we can do is if we select a layer and we press Alt, left square bracket, that seals it off at the start. So we can left square bracket and Alt, right square bracket, and that's ending it basically. So it's like micro editing within After Effects. So it is a little bit of sort of useful things to do. I think that's probably covered the timeline for now. We'll come back in part 3 for a little bit more timeline action and maybe some bits of effects, and also the toolbar, which is pretty much bread and butter of all of this as well. And hopefully once we get through all of that, we'd have gelled in hopefully some good info into your heads, and then we can go diving into a little bit more specific things like masking and layer styles and text effects and shape layers and things like that. So yeah, I'll see you in part 3.